I'm JC from the Elder Props, and today we're going to build the most requested and most unnecessarily complicated book from the comment section, the Spellbook from Star vs. the Forces of Evil, which took so long. This build looked more or less simple in the beginning, since all the parts are relatively simple to make, but the problem is there were quite a lot of them. But let's start from the beginning. The first part, of course, is to make the text block, which is all the content of the book itself. And since my old sketchbook was about to run out, I decided to make this book half spellbook and half sketchbook. So in the end, the textbook would have three parts. The first part would be the pages copied from the TV show. The second part would be just a bunch of white drawing paper. And for the last part, I decided to use some mid-tone paper so I could practice drawing lights and leaving the normal color of the paper to be the shadows. To replicate the pages from the TV show, I usually just take some screenshots from it and then use this handy tool in Photoshop to reshape, resize, and then complete any lines or characters that are missing. Usually there are big chunks of the pages missing because they are never shown on the episodes, so I usually just copy and paste parts of other pages, or I just invent characters and drawings that more or less go with the tone of the rest of the book. After all the pages are redrawn, it's time to print them out. For this, I just print the odd pages first and then grab the pages, put them back into the printer and print the even pages on the other side. And now, since my printer uses regular ink and not toner, I need to go make some photocopies, because the aging process requires the paper to be dipped in water, and that completely ruins normal inks. Aging the paper can be done in several ways. You can use tea, coffee, wood stain. I use fabric dyes because they are cheap, and since they are so strong, you only need to keep the paper under water from 10 to 20 seconds for it to be ready. This process is repeated for all pages, and then it's just a matter of letting them dry. Since I wanted my text block to be sewn with actual thread and needle, I needed to join all the pages so I could build signatures later. After all the aged pages are glued together, that means the spellbook part is ready, so we can go into the next part, which is the sketchbook. The white pages of the book are just a sketchpad that I disassembled and then reassembled in 4-page signatures. And the same goes for the mid-tone paper, just fold in half and assemble 4-page signatures. After all the signatures are assembled, I just took my homemade punching cradle and my very old awl and started making some holes. And now everything's ready to start sewing. Once again, there are many ways to do this, so I will just leave a list of tutorials in the description. For the gluing part, there are of course many legit materials you can use. In my case, I just use gauze because it's cheap and it's available everywhere. And of course, I forgot to add the bookmarks, so I had to add them a little bit later. After that, you just throw a couple of clamps and you let it dry, and the text block is done. And now comes the interesting part, which is actually building all the little part that goes in the cover and the back of the book. For this, I first went into Photoshop and made a vector version of all the pieces so I could print them out and trace them into wood using carbon paper. When making this kind of props based on objects from cartoons, there always comes a point where you just can't tell what materials are canon or not within the story, so you just have to pick and choose whatever material you prefer. In my case, I thought some wooden decorations would look good and maybe a little bit of metal on top, so I just went for it. Sadly, my last sheet of brass was a little bit tiny, so I had to improvise and I made a little jigsaw puzzle for myself to reassemble later. All of the other decorations from the book follow the same process, tracing them into wood with copy paper and then cutting them in the scroll saw. And just a little tip, in case you're using spiral saw blades like me, you will need a lot of sanding after cutting anything. Here's before and here's after sanding. For the golden decorations, I initially thought I would use another piece of metal, but as mentioned earlier, I ran out of brass, so I had to change the plan a little bit. I first drew the silhouette of the central decoration with a light color, then I used a pyrograph to create a groove that was more or less deep, and then used some nail polish to paint in the golden parts, so it would look as if I had poured molten gold into the wood and it burned while cooling off. For the green parts of the book, I did the same but used some acrylic paint to give the final color. Now that all the pieces are ready, it's time to cut the leather, glue it to the covers that in this case are 2 pieces of MDF. And since I couldn't find leather of the correct color, I just used some acrylic paints to give it the correct hue. I just left one of the sides without glue so I could install one of those little magnets that are used to close handbags. I wanted to install some metal corners to protect the MDF and the leather from ungluing, but I couldn't find ones of the correct size, so I just used those metallic thingies and cut them a little bit so they would actually have the shape of a triangle. Once all of those were screwed in place, that would actually work as a functional protection for the corners, I cut some extra wooden triangles and put them on top of that so it would actually look like the book in the cartoons. Then I added a couple of leather straps that would work as the raised bands in the spine of the book. And then came the best part, which is assembly. I just placed all the little pieces on the back and the front, drilled some pilot holes just to be sure the wood and the MDF won't split, and then used very tiny nails to fix everything in place. In reality, the first part I ever planned of this book were the jewels that come in the front and in the spine of the book. I initially thought of making the jewels out of resin, like making molds and then casting them and then painting with some sort of translucent ink, but later I thought that I really wanted a good looking book, so if the book needed some crystals, maybe I should get some real stones. I luckily found this offensive piece of jewelry that just had the correct shape of stones and the hue of purple was more or less okay, so I just decided to cut it up and use it. The stones were a little bit too big for the jewel on the spine of the book, so I just went to my trusty grinder and cut one of them in half, which turned out to be the perfect size. Then I cut a little wooden circle where the jewel would fit and added a little bit of string so it would be fixed to the spine of the book through the leather of the cover. For the little golden decoration in the spine, I originally thought of once again using some metal, but then I got too lazy, so I just decided to make a little stencil and use nail polish to paint the golden in. I used the same string to fix both jewels to the cover through the leather and the MDF. And we're almost done. Now we just need to assemble the strap that holds the book closed. For this I just used one more strap of leather and a little bit of metal that I found lying on the street. I just cut it to the correct size, rounded the corners a little bit, and then stuck it with glue. All the thread in the strap is just decoration. I finally made a little hole in the back so the magnet could stick directly to the metal since it was just not working through the leather. I then used a couple of tiny nails to fix it permanently to the back of the book. Now that all the pieces are glued and nailed in place, I turn it around and use my Dremel to cut all the points that are sticking out of the MDF. Only now that all the spiky bits have been removed, I can actually glue the text block to the cover. Once everything is dried up, I decided once again to use nail polish and draw the little details that are written on the clasp of the book. And for the final part of the book, which is the dangly thing that hangs from the spine of the book, I decided to call upon my wife. She possesses arcane knowledge about making jewelry, and I refuse to partake in any safe activity that won't potentially end up in me losing a finger. And with that, the book is finally complete and we can all move on with our lives. Don't forget, all the pages I redrew and the shapes for the little pieces in the back and the front of the book can be downloaded from my site, link in the descriptions. If you have any cool suggestions of what should we build next, please leave it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, I upload at least once every 100 years.